Okay. Good morning, ladies, and welcome to Torah with the Takeaway. This week's Parshas, Parshas Shemos. This is the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu. This is the beginning of the Shibud Mitzrayim, of the Golus in Mitzrayim. We're not going to be discussing this topic, but I have taken it up before. The main aspect of the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu is Vayar B'Sivlo Sam. He saw their suffering. That's a man raised in a palace was able to empathize with people in a different situation than he was in. But the topic I have chosen for today, which I have discussed years ago, but I'd like to bring up again, is a topic we must hear every once in a while. And that is, we're calling today's topic, the importance of being important. The Or Chaim HaKadosh says in this week's Parsha that the entire time that Yosef was in Mitzrayim, the Jews were regarded as, superior, as royalty over the Egyptians. Once Yosef passed away and some of the Shvatim, they were considered equal to the Egyptians. And once that generation, at least the Shvatim passed away, they were considered inferior. And then once the whole generation of that time passed away, they were enslaved. So we're going to be talking about that. What is that phenomenon about? How can we explain it? Our second question for today is how the midwives, we talk about Shifra and Puah. That was Yocheved and Miriam. That it was very interesting. Rashi says, it says in the Pasuk, Vatachyena hamyaldos es Elokim, that the midwives, Vatirena hamyaldos es Elokim, that the midwives feared Hashem. And they also allowed, they went against, in the face of Paro, and they allowed babies to live. Paro said that every baby should be thrown into the Nile, and yet these midwives did not listen to him. At least he wanted all the males to be killed, and they would just help women give birth, be midwives, help them give birth, defy Paro's orders, and Hashem, rewarded them for this. But it's mentioned in the pasuk that they feared Hashem. They also allowed the children to live. And in reward for this, they had kahuna and malchus. They gave birth. They later had the tribes of the Kohanim, the Shevet Levi, and they also had the tribes of and malchus. They also had Yehuda. Those are all from Leah, from Shifra and Puah. Now, because Miriam married into Yehuda. Now, the thing is, though, Rashi says a very enigmatic comment on this. He says that they would, one was, why do they call themselves by these nicknames of Shifra and Puah? Shifra, Shemeshaperes es Havlad, she would beautify the child. She would wash his or her little face. And she would, make the child look very nice after birth. And Puah, she would croon, or she would sing to the child. Now, the pasuk seems to say differently. The pasuk seems to infer that they were saving lives and defying themselves in the eyes of Paro. Why is this little detail so important, as we mentioned by Rashi? And their nicknames, why aren't they called Yocheved and Miriam? Why are they should be called Chaya? That they gave life to children, not that they are there, that they crooned the children and beautified them. Here's the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu, the most important leader of the Jewish people. And yet, Moshe, because I took him out of the water. That's an interesting name forever. For posterity should have that name when there's so much more to Moshe Rabbeinu. He's called by many names in the Torah, but the name given by Basi is what he's usually referred to. Why is that important? Okay, so we're going to now delve into our subject about the things we can learn from the Or Chaim HaKadosh. The main presenter for tonight is the Heilige Reb Chaim Leib Shmulevitz. And when I was pregnant with my youngest child, I was so enamored by him. I was reading his biography at the time. And it just so happened that my son was due on his yard site. It didn't quite happen like that. He came into this world 2 or 3 weeks later, after actually. But I was insistent. I fell so in love with the character of Rav Chaim Shmulevitz that I wanted to name my last child after him. Chaim Shmulevitz was called the Sefer Torah of the Mir. He knew the contents of every book in the Mir Yeshiva library, which is quite big. He was a total genius. He fell asleep learning, like he would bang into his pillow, whatever he had learned that day, wanted to be part of his persona. And then when he woke up in the morning, first thing was learning. It's all he thought about was learning. All he dreamt about was learning. All he did was learning. However, usually people develop certain sides of themselves, which are wonderful. But the mark of a gadol, the hallmark of a great person, is they develop the other sides of themselves. Usually a great genius is not so strong in interpersonal relationships. They could be a little spacey, to get them to just focus on what we're talking about right now. It was very famous stories about Rav Chaim that he said whenever he'd see a woman going out of a shoe store with her child who just got his first pair of shoes, he would cry because he realized his child can walk, can stand up now. The whole way an infant grows. He was just so taken, like how the mother must feel at that point in her life. Once a man came to him telling him he's going blind, and Rav Chaim Shmulevitz cried for 20 minutes with him. He never knew the man in his life. He just so much felt, and he focused. Those were a lot of his shiurim, focusing on how you have to think of the other person. Whenever they'd read Megillus Rus on Shavuos morning, and half the men would be like ready to go to sleep already after being up a whole night, Chaim Shmulevitz would cry when he heard that Rus walked barefoot over the stones on her way back to Eretz Yisrael with Naomi. The famous thing though about Rav Chaim, there's two famous stories about Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. I wanted to throw it all in. I figured let's get a background to whom we're hearing this from. And there are other people I'm quoting tonight, but I will mention them by name. And when I don't quote, it's Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. The story of Entebbe in 1972, I believe, when so many Jews were taken hostage, amongst them Rav Hutner Zatzal. And it was a very frightening time. People were davening, people were worried about them. There wasn't a asifa, there was a gathering of people in Yerushalayim to daven for these captives that they should be freed. And amongst these captives was Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. I'm sorry, amongst the people davening was Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. He was supposed to lead the Tehillim that night. So he's making his way up to the podium up in front where he's supposed to say the Tehillim, podium, bima, whatever it was. And he kept pausing in the aisle. He couldn't, and he starts sobbing like a baby. And the whole audience became quiet, and all you could hear was Rav Chaim, who was a very apparently tall man, broad shoulders, tall man, bawling for these people. He opened up the Sefer Tehillim. He was about to start davening, and he couldn't control himself. He's just crying and crying, and he says, imagine if it would be your brother. Imagine if it would be your sister. Like he couldn't contain himself, Rav Chaim. He was just so in love with the Jewish people and such feelings for another person. That's what made him so special. The second famous story about Rav Chaim Shmulevitz is very famous, that in the 1967 war, there was apparently, there was a gas tank that exploded. And a lot of people had to go down to the bomb shelter. There's a bomb shelter under the Mir Yeshiva, and everybody was down there davening and pouring their hearts up. They kept hearing bombing going on. People were terrified. And everything at the end was safe. Well, apparently somehow they bombed a nearby water tank that put out the flames of the gas tank. And it was a miracle how it all happened. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz he had to take advantage of this moment of inspiration. And he addressed everybody the next day, and he told them, I want you all to know that what saved us last night was not the tefillos of the Mir Rosh Yeshiva, not the tefillos of the holy people learning Torah, but there was a lady there, a laundress, an aguna, whose husband refused to give her a get. And she was forced to make this tremendously lowly type of income for herself, washing people's laundry. And she was often insulted by people. And he overheard her saying, Rebbeinu Shalaylam, to save Klal Yisrael, I forgive them all. I forgive them all. He says, we were saved in the merit of this aguna. So that's just a little bit about some of the stories from Chaim Shmulevitz. I'm detouring a little bit from my normal topics. I just thought we should have some background. But in any case, let's get back to our topic about the beginning of Shibud Mitzrayim, the enslavement of the Jews in Egypt. The Or Chaim HaKadosh, who tells us that the whole time the brothers were alive were beyond enslavement, and they were, Yosef, they were superior by the brothers, they were equal, and then once they died, the Jews were inferior, and then finally enslaved. He says we learn two principles from this Or Chaim in the beginning of Parshas Shemos. He says, number one, the Egyptians cannot enslave people who are respectable. That's an important principle. And number two, we cannot be enslaved if we're respectable. That's a very important principle to know when dealing with the Yetzer Hara. Most sins that we commit, okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by the things on screen. Most sins that we commit happen because at that moment we throw faith to the wind and we just say, who cares? What I do is, it's not so important. It's insignificant. The moment we consider ourselves insignificant is when we fail. That's what life is not important. What we're doing right now is not important. What we're saying right now is not important. We're not considering ourselves important. It always ties in, says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, to a moment of sin. There is unworthiness that happens at that moment, insignificantness. And we usually talk about honor seeing big negative, but I once saw something and made such an impression. I heard this maybe, I don't know how, many years ago, when I was 21, which is about a year ago. I heard this said, but in the name of Hutner, and I'll never forget it because it was so important to me. A lot of times we demean the idea of covet, and there is a reason to demean covet. Covet could get in the way and really hurt other people, and we'll see a little bit about that playing out today. But Rav Hutner said something very important. He said, you know what? Sometimes if a person feels that they want to be considered special, unusual, if they say the worst thing you could tell a woman is that, oh, your dress looks just like somebody else's, or that you look like somebody else, you lose your uniqueness. The reason why a person doesn't want to hear it is Rav Hutner says it's simple. He says when all the world was created, Hashem made the zebras, let's say. Some have more stripes, some have less stripes, but more or less they all are the same. Adam nivra yechidi, man was created alone, in order that he should say, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, in order that he should say, for me, the world was worthy of being created. That's why the world was created, for me. A person is unique. There's no two people alike. No two people look exactly alike, even identical twins. No two people think identically, or have the same traits. Every person is unique, and there's no one else going to be like him. There's no minute going to be like the minutes we're living in now. There's no opportunities given to anyone else but us. At every given moment, we're unique. So there is a reason why it feels a need for covet. Just like there's a need for taiva. If people there wouldn't be children born, there wouldn't be food consumed, people wouldn't preserve their lives if there wouldn't be taiva. There's a need for honor, self-dignity as well. Because self-dignity means you're saying that Bishvili nivra ha'olam, which is the Chazal. We're saying that the world, we have a very big, instead of feeling that we're lowly individuals, we're supposed to feel a sense of heightened greatness, and that brings responsibility. That's what we have something unique to contribute, and where is it? That's what we have to think of. Now, covet gets us into trouble, says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, when we start thinking about what other people are thinking of us. That's when we get into trouble. But otherwise, to just think about that we are respectable beings, that's an imperative. We have to think that way. In fact, Rav Yerucham Levavitz, I know you may have heard these ideas, but we all need to hear them over and over, because especially during the times we live in, there's so little that we can do with ourselves now. They said that a lot of organizations have been destroyed. Okay, the new organizations have happened with Hatzalah and things like that, but where's all the Hachnasas Orchim? Bikur Cholim, we can't go hospitals, like that Hachnasas Kala, where's the wedding? Like Avaya Sames, we don't have chesed like we had. The proportion, the dimension, our roles are different. Some people's roles are increased, but most of us, I think, are diminished. What are we doing? What can we do already? We have to find what we can be worthy of, because we really have a mission every moment. It seems like we don't, like we used to. We used to have such a mission, a calling in life. And now it seems like what are we here for? So we have to maximum and do, even little things are considered important, everything. But for a person to think that they're inferior, you're really insulting the Creator. Now, Yosef employed these tactics. He could have told himself, when Potiphar's wife was changing her clothes 3 times a day, and she says, do you like my Givenchy? Do you like my Dior? She was trying so many times to get Yosef in so many ways. Ralph Lauren, Zara. Instead of telling himself, I could burn in Gehenna for this. Nope. Yosef said, what if he said, in our family, a son was chosen to be like the Akedah. What if I'm the next Akedah? He decided at this moment, when things were low, to employ the idea of, I'm amazing. I'm great. I could be tremendous. I'm the son he saw his father's face. What is his father's face doing? The idea that I'm from such a holy clan, from a holy tribe. How can I succumb to this? This is what was going through Yosef's mind. This is how he controlled himself for a year's time from Eshes Potiphar. Or he said to himself, he knew the story with Reuven having interfered with his father's marital affairs, that Reuven had moved the beds because for the honor of his mother Leah. And he said like Reuven already was not going to be the Bechor, most likely. Yosef says, I'm going to lose my chelek. I won't be on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. This is what he kept telling himself. What's going to be? Maybe I'll be the Bechor now if Reuven won't be the Bechor. He kept employing the idea of, I have so much potential. What am I going to do with it? It'll be lost. This is how we're supposed to talk to ourselves, especially in this generation. It's been said by many. We need, of course, Musa, we need to know there's a Gehenna and there's an Olam Haba. Rav Victor Miller says many times that a person has to know that there is such a thing as Gehenna, and he should tell his children about it. And he should talk about Olam Haba. People don't talk about Olam Haba. They talk about Torah and mitzvahs, but it's important to tell our children about Olam Haba. And tell ourselves that, this is not the end all and be all. This world is a temporary world. Like Rav Steinman, Zechron Livracha, used to always talk about upstairs, and the Rebbitzin also. They used to say that this is the false world and the real world is upstairs. What are we going to bring upstairs? Now, we find a similar idea, says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, with the protocol used for witnesses when they give a testimony in Beis Din. If a people have to give capital punishment witnessing, they saw somebody commit a murder, lo aleinu. So, and of course, capital punishment, there's 2 of the 10 commandments involved here, not bearing false witness and not committing murder. This is heavy stuff to be a witness at a capital punishment crime. Ketzad ma'aimim ala edin. What do we tell these witnesses that are about to testify in order that they shouldn't commit, God forbid, the idea of false testimony? You tell the person, we're just going to paraphrase, a man was created alone. That's what we tell the people that are about to testify. So it says, when one Jew is lost, he's like losing an entire world. And that's what you're supposed to say to the witnesses that are testifying in Beis Din about a capital punishment case. Is we're telling them how great a person is, how great the soul that was lost was. Now, there's a story about Rav Chaim Weiser Krasinski. In his day, they're already starting to do all this type of lo aleinu. The Polish government was allowing, right before World War II, was allowing the whole idea for the sake of science with cadavers, to do all kinds of explorations, like an autopsy, so to speak, with cadavers. And people, they were pressuring Jews into using Jewish subjects. And of course, we're not allowed to have any type of autopsy performed usually. And then they asked, well, what about Reb Chaim? What about like lowlifes? What about Jewish criminals, like the worst of our flock? Can they be used for the purpose of science? And they said, Reb Chaim Weiser shuddered. And he said, do you know who these neshamas could have been? We don't know who they are. We don't know their greatness. How do we know who they are? If we don't know who they are, how can we even touch their bodies? He wasn't even talking halacha. Halacha is asur. But he just was explaining that we don't know how great every Jewish person is. the greatness inherent inside. And then Rashi says on this Gemara there, Chashuvani olam malay. I should consider myself like a whole planet. Lo atridas atzmi mina olam ba'avera achas. Don't lose yourself for one sin. You are a whole world. You yourself, don't lose yourself because of one sin you could commit. And this will keep a person from refraining from sin. That's in Sanhedrin Lamed Zayin for any of you that are very particular with footnotes. Now, what about monetary disputes? In monetary disputes, we're told by the person, it says, if somebody, let's say a monetary dispute, they're supposed to tell the witnesses before they testify, I want you to know the people that hire you, if you tell a lie, the people that hired you are even going to look upon you as a lowly subjects. The reason why a person's so careful about his covet, there's a good point there, because there is something there. There is something, a quality, the neshama of a human being that Hashem gave us, and especially a nishmas Yisrael that we have, that we can't sully, and that should be the way we approach ourselves to control ourselves and keep ourselves from sin. The story I always like to throw in, but Rav Yosef Leib Bloch, one of the first Rosh Hashivas of Telz, the head of the whole Telz dynasty, and he, between the world wars somewhere or other, could have been World War I, I'm not certain, or could have been before World War I even, somewhere along those lines, you get lost sometimes. The yeshiva in Telz was starving for food. All they had to serve the boys at that time was black bread, which was considered somewhat inferior, and they dipped it in oil for a little bit of calories. And that was all they served. And the rumors had it that the Rosh Yeshiva was eating on fine china and was not living like the rest of the yeshiva. So in those days, people had more self-dignity than today. You see how people used to dress and everything, but they had more self-dignity. They had a little bit of chutzpah. Why? Because they felt maybe that, we're not going to just back off. Today, there's too much apathy. But in those days, people really cared. They really did something. So a whole group of Bachrim, a whole delegation went to the Rosh Yeshiva's house to see what he did at lunch. So they walked in, they knocked at the door. They said, we heard rumors that the Rosh Yeshiva is eating differently than the Bachrim, and we just wanted to check that out. So he says, please come in. And sure enough, the table was set with fine china and beautiful settings. And they saw the Rosh Yeshiva told them to come in, and they were eating black bread dipped in oil. Why were they eating on fine china? The Rosh Yeshiva told them, Afilu nasata lahem, kesudas shleima b'shatai. Even if you give them, you serve them a meal like Shlomo HaMelech had in his day, like Shlomo served everything on his table. He pulled out all the stoppers. Lo yatsasa yedei chayvascha. You have not fulfilled your obligation. Shebnei Avram Yitzchak Yaakov heim. When you're serving a Jew, you're serving the children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So we eat like this to feel dignified. Even though it's just the family, we eat this way to feel dignified. And the Telz dynasty was always about dignity. And in fact, Rebbetzin Sorotzkin, Reb Baruch Sorotzkin's wife, Zechrona Livracha, they say during the war years, when they were fleeing the Nazis, they would be going by train or however. She always, when they served lunch, she saved a little piece of cloth from home. She put out on the table. Now they had almost nothing to eat, but she put it out to feel like we're going to eat at mealtimes. And I think the mealtimes were the same. No matter what, she tried to keep mealtimes the same to show we're not letting all this get us down. We are going to have things like normal. And in fact, we are dignified human beings, and we're never going to lose our dignity. Dignity is so important, and aspiring for greatness is so important. Shraga Feivel Mendelovitz used to say, if a Jew doesn't look up to the stars, he's going to fall in the mud. Rav Bakst, I've quoted this many times, but it's important. Those of you who haven't heard it before will hear it now. Rav Bakst from Detroit. There's a Gemara that says, Kol ochel b'shuk. Whoever eats while he's walking. I checked this with our local Rav, Rabbi Lowy from Toronto, and he says a person, he said it is customary today for people to drink in public, like water or something. But eating, like if you're sitting there munching on your ice cream while you're walking, like they do at the exhibition in Toronto or something like that, it says, Doma lekelev, you're like a dog, but pasal la'edus, and you're not considered to be, you're not a kosher witness in Beis Din. You can't be kosher for a chuppah, You can't witness something if you eat in public, like while you're walking around, while you're moving. In other words, if you're not dignified. So says Rav Bakst, if a person's not dignified, their words aren't important. So he's not going to be careful. Every word he says and based in is going to be measured, that it's going to be accurate, and it's going to be, he doesn't consider himself important enough that every word counts. If a person has to first initially have that idea of self-importance, and only then can he continue and progress in his lifestyle. A person must have that self-dignity at all times to get anywhere in life. Rav Matisyahu Solomon commented many years ago, and it applies even more so today, that during the hippie generation, people asked him, like, what's this whole thing with the long hair? In Israel, they have the cuckoos. I think that describes what it really is. For a guy, it's cuckoo to dress like that. And today they have torn jeans. You know, if you look at any pictures of like anything up until, I don't know what, 1950, maybe, perhaps, 1950. I was in a museum once, so it was showing a streetcar museum in Pittsburgh. And every single person, every man wore a jacket and a hat. And we're not talking about the yeshiva world, we're talking about the goyim. They were all dressed elegantly and, you know, distinctively, and, you know, like to show there was a sense of dignity. He said this whole idea of why that generation in the 60s or 50s, 60s, they all of a sudden, you know, people started to dress down, and now it got even worse. Not only they're dressing down, but they're, you know, they're torn jeans. He said the idea is we're not so, you know, we're just like, we're nothing special. So we can do anything. If you're already dressing like an animal, you could act like one, you know what I mean? It gives you permission to do anything because you're already considering yourself like a nobody anyways. Somebody told me last year that they saw a bunch of that there were a bunch of Beis Yaakov girls that went to Niagara Falls together as a delegation, and they overheard a child commenting, a non-Jewish child, saying, "Are these girls princesses?" Because the idea was when you're wearing a long flowy skirt, you know, they all wear the long flowy skirts, that, you know, that must be a princess. You know, so that really shows the importance of tznius. And we have that. That's one of the main reasons that people, they think it's just cover it up. It's ugly. It's such a dignity to be dressed. It's a dignity. It's a, you know, you know, the self-dignity that we get from that. And it starts from the externals. And that's why that, you know, see us, we have that opportunity as women, especially, and men too, with the Hasidic garb. In the Muslim time of the Muslim movement, the time of Rav Simcha Zissel, he wanted to reinstate the dignity of yeshiva bachrim because there was the Haskalah going on, and, you know, the Enlightenment, where people were feeling at that time like they were all, you know, the greatness of opera and symphony and all that. Now it's beautiful. I once went to a symphony with Hannah Cooper. I don't know if she remembers, years ago. A student of mine just gave me like 5th row tickets to this Toronto Symphony. It was 4 days before Pesach. I can't think of a better time to go. I'd never been to one. And it was like, oh my goodness. There's no music that you can hear in the world that compares to being close up to a symphony. The nuances of every instrument. It was like mind-blowing, putting it mildly. And yet, look at the Quran. Where did it get the world? Where did all these symphonic music and operas and culture and books, where did it get the world? They're still as lowly as ever. They're almost back to the pagan times that where they started, you know, with the morality. So all that really got us nowhere. But the externals is where we should start. Like when a person, I interrupted myself. So Rav Simcha Zissel, in his day, when they had the Haskalah, they had the Enlightenment, what he decided to do was, he all the boys like would wear top hats, and I think they took walking sticks as well. Like this whole idea was in order that people should feel like, you know, dignified. Like that's why they have the Hasidim dress in such garb. This is how the nobility used to dress. And in even the yeshiva world, always a hat and jacket. It's showing a sense of self-dignity. You can't sin when you're this dignified looking person. It's hard to bring yourself to sin. You know, as a proof, the first thing we feel like doing, ballet, okay. The first thing we feel like doing when we are feeling low is just throw on something in the closet, just throw anything on. But that's the last thing we should do. Really, when we feel down, the first thing we should do is put on makeup. Then you could maybe take off 10 years minimum. And after that, you should get dressed like a person to look, when you look good, you just say, wait a second, look yourself in the mirror. I'm not that bad, you know what I mean? I can't be all that bad. And it's also, we're taking care of it, Selam Elokim. Like we have this beauty to ourselves, this gorgeous self. How can we just throw on anything? We're not just anything. We have it, Selam Elokim, we can't forget that. This whole theme continues, says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. It talks about during the time of the Mishkan, it says, Vayivo kol ish asher naso libo. And all men that decided that were raised up to do something came to volunteer to help for the Mishkan. The Ramban says, being slaves, a lot of people had no inkling how to deal with the Mishkan. They didn't know what to do. In fact, Betzalel, who was the chief of the whole operation, the young man, he had no inkling how to make anything. And here he was the chief craftsman of the whole Mishkan because he was the mastermind of the whole thing because he wanted to. I'm going to do it because I want to. You must have heard Holocaust stories about people that would go approach the Germans and would say things like, I know how to be a maker of bombs or something. People would just volunteer to get out of the lower levels of slavery in the concentration camps. I don't know about bombs. I'm making an extreme example, but they would say, I'm a tailor, I'm a this. People would try to get this. They would because they felt they had to. They had no choice. Here, if a person feels, I want to serve Hashem, he'll give me I'll figure it out. I'll figure out what to do. I can do anything if I want to. How many people, look at Sarah Schneer, who was a seamstress, started a revolution because she wanted to. She felt the burning need in her heart that there had to be something for the women so they wouldn't be lost and feeling like only the non-Jewish street is intellectual and interesting and the Jewish world has nothing to offer. Or the famous thing that the Vilna Gaon once said, Asben Vilnar, Ketman Zayin Again. If a person only wants, a person could be even a genius in Torah. And so many people just plugged away and they became great, brilliant people. Like the Nasiv, very famous story that they thought they would apprentice him to somebody because he didn't seem to be, learning wasn't his strong point. And yet he became the Netziv and a huge Rosh Hashiva Volozhin and writer of Sfarim, and all from that desire that he could do it. So Chaim Shmulevitz says that it's interesting in Parshas Shmini when we're told not to eat disgusting, creepy, crawly insects. It says, "Anochi Hashem hamala eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim." I am the Lord your God who took you out of Mitzrayim. And Rabbi Shmuel says that El Mali Halesi Sisrom Mitzrayim El Bishvil Davar Zeh She'ein Metamim B'Shratzim Dayo. Rabbi Shmuel says, comments on this pasuk. He says, if the only purpose to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim is not to eat lowly bugs, it's enough. And Rav Chaim Shmulevitz says this means eating bugs means, look, I'm a nothing. I'm a nothing. I'm one of a million people, and so I eat bugs. I'm like a worm. I'm like a frog. I'm like a this. To bring yourself to eat these lowly creatures. Now, of course, we don't do it because it's a chok. We do it because but that mention at the end it's to teach us a lesson that we're supposed to regard ourselves as great individuals and not to defile ourselves in lowly pursuits. Rav Shimshon Pinkus Itzal tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu appeared to Paro, the first words he was told to say to Paro were, now you'd think he's going to say, watch your back. I'm here. I'm coming. Nope. He says, B'ni Bechori Yisrael. My eldest, my most precious, beloved child are the Jewish people. Moshe had to say that because, first of all, he had to hear those words. That gave him the courage to continue his speech. And Paro had to hear this. He probably knew it too. When we consider ourselves respectable, people don't have to remind us. When we want to mingle with everybody else and feel like we're part of them, that's when the troubles start for us in Gullus. He gives an example. A father comes to the Rebbe in a cheder, knocks on the door and just wants to take a spot check how his son is doing in a cheder. So the Rebbe answers him, the class is doing fantastic. He says, but where's my Yankala? He's not here right now. So how's he doing? I came here to see about my son. I didn't care about the rest of you. B'ni Bechori Yisrael means that Hashem care, even though the Jews were in the depths of despair, it looks like we were persecuted, we were having it worse than the rest of the world. Hashem, in his uppermost thoughts, is always about the Jewish people. Shimshon Pincus mentions also how important it is, kavod, dignity, how much we have to have dignity for Hashem. I've mentioned this before. I believe Rav Nosson Bachvogel Zatzal mentions this. It says, "Uvahechalo kulo omer kavod." Everything about Hashem screams honor. And we mention the word honor so many times in our davening in Kedusha. We say, "Malo chol haaretz kavoda." The world is filled with his honor. Kavodo malei olam. His world. What does it mean? Honor, 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 all over the place in Kedusha. So Rav Nosson Bachvogel explains, what does honor mean? Importance. Kulo omer kavod. Everything is important. Everything is meaning. Like it's the word kaved, which means heavy. Everything has deep, important meaning. Every action, every nuance, everything. He was talking about people have to be more careful when they pronounce Hashem's name, like in a bracha. A lot of people don't say it right. Like, I've heard a lot of Balei Tshuva say, Shalom Aleichem Malachei Asharis, Mimelech Malachei Hamlachim. Some people say Hashem is like the king of the angels. That's wrong. Melech Malchei Hamlachim. If saying the words right of davening is very important. Or Kiddush Shanu. It's supposed to be Kiddush Shanu. Different words like that we just are zipping through, and we fail to think the words are important because we're talking about Hashem. We're saying his name. One time, Rav Shimshon Pincus heard somebody say a bracha, mispronouncing Hashem's name, and he told this boy, no, that wasn't the proper pronunciation. So the boy said, what sin did I commit? Did I say a blessing in vain? Was it stealing? Like, what did I do wrong? And Rav Shimshon Pincus said, the worst thing you did wrong was you didn't give Hashem proper dignity by saying his name properly. So we're supposed to have this kulo omer kavod. We're supposed to give kavod to others. Like we're told in Mishnah Avos, Ezehu mechabed and mechubed hamechabed es habrios. Who is honorable? He that honors others, because that shows that we see that honor in everyone. We see that Tselem Elokim in everyone, that image of God in everyone. Now, as an aside, I had to throw this in because it just contradicts what we just said, and we have to explain it. It's beautiful. Rav Koppelman's itself from Lucerne says, if it's, like he says, like, we hear shrutzim, like eating bugs is such a lowly thing. And that's one of the, even though there's not a reason, it's a tam. It's a small reason why we don't eat bugs. Why does it say when the Jewish people multiplied, it says paru v'ravu vayishritzu. They multiplied and they were swarming. That's how it's translated. But it means they were like insects. Like swarming, like a used sheretz is the root of vayishritzu. If it's so horrible, so why is the Jewish population growth considered like swarming? And Rashi says that there were 6 at once, that it was similar to bugs, whatever. But why do we have to use this thing about Jewish people? So it says that the reason why they were enslaved, it's explaining their enslavement. It says, but timalei haaretz osam. It says the Gashmias filled their souls. What filled them? They filled the world. It says they multiplied and they were like swarming like insects and they filled the world. That's what the verse means literally. But he says we take it figuratively. The land of Egypt, which was very immoral, filled them. It was filling them up. How much of us is filled up by the world around us? How much of the world around us are we letting penetrate our souls? And then it filled them up. So that's why it said by Yishritzu. They became like lowly because they let the world fill them up. So it fits in perfectly with what we said in the beginning, with what we're saying all along. Like when you feel lowly, then you succumb to lowly things. And that's what he says. They were filled up with this lowliness of Egypt. They wanted to be like the Egyptians. So because of that, what happened was that by Yishritzu, they swarmed like everybody else swarms. There was nothing unique about being a Jew. But Yosef Hayab Mitzrayim. Yosef was in Egypt. He was the same Yosef that was the tzaddik, and he, from the beginning to the end, here was a man, if you imagine it, the Jews moved to Goshen. Until the Jews came, he was alone with all the Egyptian people, the lowliest immoral people, never losing his restraint and his superior, morality of being one of the tribes of Israel. And then later, he withstood the test like a Yosef. Even when somebody insults us, says Rav Victor Miller, when you were insulted by somebody, and that's going against your Tzelem Elokim, a Jew should not be insulted. How can you insult another Jew? The Jew is made in the image of God. How can you insult somebody made in the image of God? So you have to look at that person as right now he's not acting with a spark of divine. His divine spark is not what's speaking. He's speaking from his animal side. He said you have to imagine it like a cockroach screaming at you, or a frog speaking at you, or a croaking at you, or a dog barking. That person right now, I'm not hearing a human voice, I'm hearing a cockroach voice. Now, of course, later on, when the heat of the moment passes, if they said anything relevant, we should think, did I really do anything wrong? But the way to have to insult another person and come across like that, you're not speaking like a dignified human being at that moment. You're not speaking like a human being at all. Now, how does it manifest itself, the greatness of a person? How can we get it? By A, not letting insults bother us. By B, the externals, how important the externals, dressing in a dignified manner, trying to speak in a dignified manner. Speaking with, it's very coarse language, is just not behooving any type of Jew. And the small things are really what count. Eina Kadosh Baruch Hu nosein gedula la'adam ad shebodkeu b'davar katan. Shemos Rabbah. Person doesn't give greatness to a person until he checks them with little things. All our forefathers were checked. How did you deal with sheep? That they carried them on their shoulders and they made sure the weaker sheep got fed first, and that's what brought them to all become great leaders. The small things, because you inject in those small moments an idea of importance. Everything counts, even sheep, even the way you tie your shoes, everything. And they're injecting that. Rav Hillel was, the Bitachon hotline tells us you're allowed to think about Hashem in the bathroom. You're not allowed to think Psukim or Torah, but you're allowed to think, like said Hillel, when he was in the bathhouse, he would say, I'm going to wash the face of Tzelem Elokim. He didn't say Tzelem Elokim, but he said, washing the face in the divine presence, in divine image I'm made. We have all these opportunities in the morning to pump ourselves up when we're davening. We say, Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim. Not to feel like we're superior, but we have greater expectations of ourselves. Or the neshama that you personally gave to me is pure. And you're going to take it personally from you. And you gave it to me, and you cultivated it, you fashioned it. You gave me the nose I'm supposed to have. You gave me the eyes I'm supposed to have. All those things, all those little things count. Although it makes us remember how important everything we do is. Moshe Rabbeinu became great. Says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, there's 60 years with no mention of Moshe Rabbeinu. He was a fugitive, Dasan and Aviram, he ran away from them, and that's when he became the great Moshe Rabbeinu. We hear him first rebuking them, and 60 years later, he's 80 years old, and he's the great Moshe Rabbeinu already. When he was a fugitive, when he was away from Jews, that's when he became great. A person, if they utilize their time properly and their assets and their situation, their life properly, everyone has the potential of becoming great. We're told that the sneh, at the burning bush, Moshe Rabbeinu said something. He sees this bush consumed and it doesn't burn. He said, Asura na va'ereh. I'm going to turn around and look because this is very interesting. And the Sefarno says, Moshe Rabbeinu was not your typical Jew, because why did he want to see this bush? It said it reminded him of the Jewish people, that they're constantly being humiliated and hurt and pursued and tormented, and yet they're never being consumed. This reminded him of the Jewish people, and he thought there maybe was a message within. At that moment, he got his first nevuah. When he turned away to ponder, to think about Hashem, in a moment that most people would think, oh, it's electricity. Can I benefit financially from this? What can I tell my friends about what I just saw? Instead, he used this as a moment of communion with Hashem, a moment to think about Hashem, and that's the moment that he merited nevuah. They say about Kimchas, this special woman who became the mother, I believe, 13 Kohanim Gedolim. Why did she merit such greatness? Just because the walls never saw her hair. But Chaim Shmulevitz says, not to be looked at as, like ultra frum necessarily, but ultra dignified. Like even when she was in private quarters by herself, she felt like I'm dignified all times. Like she never wanted to let down the guard of being, of being a dignified human being, and that's what made her great. Okay, so we've said so far, we're just talking about the importance of being important, how that's it keeps us from sin. It makes us preserve who our character is, how we are. It really, and externals is the way to begin with it. Giving honor to other people is, if we're giving honor to other people, it reminds us how people are honorable and we're part of the human race. And especially a Jew, especially Hashem, you're honoring Hashem who created, because if Hashem created monkeys, I mean, if people are supposed to be lowlifes, then Hashem did a bad job. We're supposed to know Hashem did a perfect job with everybody, so they deserve our honor. It's giving us a way to have more honor in ourselves is to honor others. A third way, perhaps, to pursue the trait of giving ourselves, to make ourselves more honorable mention, is not to rush. Reuven lost kahuna and malchus. He lost being the father of the Jewish people, being the Bechor, being the eldest. He would have gotten 2 tribes, or he would have had the Kohanim would have come from him. The kingship would have come from him. He lost it because Pachas Kamayim, he was impetuous. Now, it was only a mere trait. It was a little thing. It wasn't like major, but he wasn't thinking when he did something. He was too quick to rush, and that's what made him do something. Rushing also shows that we want control and want to grab it. We're not allowing Hashem to rule us. But on top of that, rushing shows you're losing your dignity. You're losing your dignity. It's something we have to keep in front of our minds always, that we are dignified people and we deserve to act in a dignified manner. Perhaps the hook between Parshas Vayechi and our Parsha is, there's always, every Parsha connects. There's usually something at the end and something in the beginning. So I'm suggesting perhaps the rebuke given to the tribes before they passed away, before Yaakov passed away. He was rebuked for being hasty. And Rav Nebenzahl Shlita says something phenomenal. He said, the episode where he either messed up the bed or he moved the bed out of Bilhah's tent and moved it to his mother's tent, whatever it was, happened when Yaakov was 99 years old. And we know that from the verses. It says, Vayelech Reuven Vayishma Yisrael. That actually he heard about what Reuven had done at the time. But he did not rebuke Reuven until he was on his deathbed. Phenomenal. Unbelievable. Rashi says why? Because he was afraid that Reuven would move over to Esav's camp if he would be rebuked. So he waited. Yaakov Avinu waited 48 years to rebuke his son Reuven for what he had done with Bilhah. Now it's going to hook into what we're saying now. We'll see in a minute. Now Esav, he's going to want to become Esav. Reuven was the antithesis of Esav. Esav was into murder and stealing. Reuven, even when he picked the jasmine flowers for his mother, he waited until it was harvest time. And these were considered, things that dropped to the ground. He was so careful not to engage in any aspect of stealing, and not even stealing from a non-Jew. A holy man, Reuven. How could it be to even entertain the thought of going along with Esav because of the rebuke? And doesn't it say in the 48 ways to wisdom, the 48 ways to acquire Torah, one of the things is oheves hatochachos, liking rebuke. Why didn't he want to take it? So Rav Nebenzahl says, of course he wouldn't initially just run off with Esav. No, that for sure. But in his mind, there would be a slight allegiance to Esav. Why? We learn, this is a very important principle. They say about Lot, says Rav Nebenzahl, that after Abraham rebuked Lot and his shepherds, Lot's shepherds were rebuked by Avram's shepherds for letting their camels and sheep graze in other people's fields, Lot left Abraham shortly after for Sodom. Sometimes people can't take rebuke. And we have to be sensitive to other people, to have that covet, that sensitivity, to be careful how we talk to other people. And it should give us pause in general. When we're hearing how you're supposed to talk to witnesses of Beis Din and tell them that the world was created for you, it's so important when we're talking to children. If we have to rebuke a child, the famous story about the Twersky dynasty, that the head of the Twersky family, who begat all the famous Twerskys that we know of today, he used to always tell his children, "It's past nicht. It's beneath you to engage in such a behavior." That a person has to think that I'm too big for this. I'm above it. I can't lower myself for such a thing. That's how we should talk to our children. We have to be so careful to wait 48 years to give the proper rebuke. For sure, we can't do it when we're angry. Famous stories about Rav Lopian would wait 2 weeks to rebuke a child before he'd think if he was angry or not. And that's chinuch habanim. And but this is, we're talking about a full grown. He was fully grown at the time. To wait 47, he felt for some reason he maybe even would have accepted Yaakov's message. Maybe he would have accepted the rebuke. But yeah, and it's a big thing to think about, because he could have grown from it. He could have learned from it. Well, we do know that Reuven was engaged in tshuva from that moment on. He was engaged in tshuva the whole time of Mechira. When they sold Yosef, the whole many years he was doing tshuva for what he did wrong. So he knew what he was doing wrong. So he didn't feel it was worthy to rebuke him all the years. He was being very careful to give musar. We find too Moshe Rabbeinu waited 40 years to rebuke the Jewish people till he was on his deathbed. David HaMelech didn't rebuke certain people till he was on his deathbed. It seems to be a classical way that Jewish leaders conduct themselves, to teach us we can't always pick out all the negative, all right now. Some people, there was a famous mashgiach, they wrote a whole book about him, a huge book called The Mashgiach, about Rav Meir Chadash, Zechron Livracha, from Hebron Yeshiva. He was really something special. He had a principle. He was very expert educator. And his feeling was he would never rebuke a student at all, period. And this is closer to our generation. He never would say a word, because he felt that the boy has to maintain his dignity. If he doesn't maintain his dignity, he's going to give up all hope and go off the other deep end. How many kids are off the derech today because of a teacher or a rebbe or a parent screaming too much at them? Okay, I'm still saying there are tremendous parents out there that had a child that just was in the wrong crowd, and it had other reasons, but there are many people today, they couldn't do so well in school and they didn't have a sense of dignity. We know a lot of people that can't succeed in learning have a hard time maintaining their frumkeit. It's an idea. If he felt it was important to rebuke a student, he would say it in general to the whole yeshiva. He would say a speech, Musar Shemos. He wouldn't take him aside and rebuke him. And I'm not saying we have to take this necessarily. Each person has to know themselves, but we can't, it's a very common thing people do. I forgot what it's called in psychology. Maybe if any of you know, you can let me know on the chat later on. There's a certain thing in psychology that people do when they get to arguments. Like if you're upset at somebody, you tend to pile on everything you know about them since they were born. And you didn't do this last week, and you didn't do this the week before, and like this crushes a human being. And we just said a person cannot do well unless they feel like they're cherished, unless they feel they're accepted for who they are no matter what. That we can't replicate a parent who has unconditional love, but let's say with spouses and with other people, we have to conduct ourselves. We have to look away from the negativity and for the small things, to appreciate another person, appreciate ourselves, not to pick at ourselves for every little thing. A person needs covet so desperately. Hillel Hazaken was once running in front of a chariot because it was a man who lost all his money and he felt he needed the covet. Covet could make a person go crazy without covet. We need every person. For ourselves, we have to minimize searching for honor. We can pump ourselves up and give ourselves the honor, just knowing that we're Jews, just knowing we're human beings. But For other people, we have to give them all the covet, because this is not anything else up. This is the way to do it. That there was a certain person that was really a son of a very holy Tana that was engaging in lowly behavior. The Rabbanim decided to give him smicha. They figured by giving him smicha, he's going to rise to the event. He's going to rise up for that. So it's very important that that a person realize that we have to build people up. Who more than Yeravam ben Nevat? They say about Yeravam was the one that tended, he turned it to the base of Migdash, and he served idolatry. What did Hashem do? Oh, they say, by the way, he wasn't such a lowlife. To have to be the head of 10 tribes, he was a somebody. They said his Torah was ein bo shum dofi. His Torah had no falsehood in it. That's how good his learning was. And it said all the people of his generation compared to him were like Isvei Hasadeh. They were like grass in comparison to him, except for Shlomo HaMelech and Achia Shiloni. That's how great he was. He was a great man. But he went up. So what did Hashem personally came to him in a dream and said to him that, come, just give up this whole thing, what you're doing, taking away the 10 tribes, and you and me and Ben Yishai and David will travel together, we'll go together in Gan Eden. So what does he do? Hashem is bringing him in through COVID. Now, some people say that the reason we have COVID-19, there's a lack of COVID. Remember that, there's a lack of COVID in our generation. Anyways, so he says, Mi Barosh, too bad he's comparing himself with other people. Too bad. Once you compare yourself, that's where you get into trouble. But to say that I'm a dignified person, I'm made in the image of God, that's a principle in Judaism. Bishvilini v'ha'olam, the whole world would have been created just for me. Of course we have to make a cheshbon hanefesh, and we have to check into ourselves, and we have to love ourselves. But we've not, kamocha means you can't get stuck on yourself. We have to love ourselves and then spread the wealth. We love all Jews. We love all people. Vayelech ish mi Beis Levi. An anonymous man came from Beis Levi and begat Moshe Rabbeinu. It's to teach us, any of us could be worthy of having a Moshe, says the Untitled Torah. Any of us could have a Moshe Rabbeinu. Every person, Rambam says, every Jew is a chelik and olam haba, can be as great as Moshe Rabbeinu in his or her way. Each person. That doesn't mean we have Hashem talking out of our throats. We weren't given those tools. But with the tools we have, we can be the greatest, less like a Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's how the Miyal, the crooning, they did the singing, they made it dignified, making something dignified. Positive. If we think of the positivity that we can do, the positivity, everything, think of a positive way, as positive spin to correct ourselves. That's the best way to correct ourselves. I'll just end with this story, beautiful story that is a few years old, but I love it, and it was amazing. There's a Rabbi Haber that I believe lives in Muncie, if I'm not mistaken. He's somehow involved with Kiruv, and he was driving along from to the Catskills for a Shabbaton. And on the way back, he was starting to get tired at the wheel. He sees in the distance that there's some kind of convenience store open in the middle of the night. So he goes in there to buy himself a coffee. And when he gets there, he sees this man with like unruly hair, like all over the place. And he's coming up to the counter. The man says to him, oh, Shalom Alecha, peace be unto you, my brother. And I realize it's an Israeli, dressed like with an afro and the whole thing there. So he answers him, Aleichem Shalom. And he says to him, the Israeli answers to him, you think you're a rabbi, you don't even know Israeli grammar, Hebrew grammar. He says, I dressed you in the singular, Shalom Alecha, peace be to you, and you say Aleichem Shalom. In fact, why do you always say, all you Jewish, religious people always say Shalom Aleichem? You know, why do you always say in the plural? And Rabbi Haber answers him, he says, you know why? He says, we say that in the plural whenever we see a Jew, because whenever a Jew walks down the street, whenever anything you've done in your life, you create angels. All the mitzvahs you do in the course of a day is angels walking with you. I have this picture. I forgot what his name was. Katzmacher, Zichron Livracha. There was this French painter that lived in Sfas named Katzmacher, Yaakov Katzmacher, Baal Tshuva, very, very impressive bearing. And he drew a lot of like beautiful little, I have a print I got in Sfas, and I loved it because he has a picture of a Jew going along the street and all these letters of Torah, Hebrew letters, are in the air around him as he walks. That's the same idea. He says that, you know, we're surrounded with the thoughts we have of Kedusha and the thoughts we have of holiness and greatness. We're not just walking like an animal walks down the street. We're walking like a Jew. He says, so much holiness, we're greeting the Malachim when we greet a Jew. That's why we respond to a Jew in the plural. So he has a long pause for that one, and he says, thank you, and whatever. They exchange the money and everything, and he leaves the store. Several weeks later, it's late at night again. He's again on the same route. He goes to the same convenience store, same Israeli, and this Israeli says, I don't know if I want to see you in this store. He says, what do you mean? He says, last week, when you came in and you gave me this whole speech about how when a Jew walks, he has malachim walking with him. Usually at this time of night, I get hungry. I go over to the area where they have the sandwiches, the fresh sandwiches, and I take myself a ham sandwich. I couldn't bring myself to eat a ham sandwich that night because I kept thinking there are malachim standing next to me. So he says that from then on, I've been keeping kosher because I couldn't bring myself to eat something not kosher when there's malachim around me. So you see how much we could pump people up by telling them how great they are and how much Hashem loves them. You know, I used to do something with my kids. I made a happiness book. Every night we'd sit down together before they went to bed and think of one good thing, how Hashem loved them that day. Now I did it a little late when the kids were getting too old already. I should have done it, but I never heard about it until then. But all of us can keep thinking every day what Hashem did for us that day, how much he loves us, how special we each are. And from that, we can build up and become really people of greatness. I thank you for listening, and I hope you realize the importance of being important.
Thank you.